This week on the show, we have Allan's recap of the ZFS User Conference, first impressions of OmniOS by a BSD user. We cover a setup of Nextcloud 13 on FreeBSD. There's an OpenBSD how-to of sorts on a fanless desktop computer, an intro to HardenedBSD, and DragonFlyBSD getting some SMP improvements. Something for everyone in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 245, ZFS User Conference 2018. Hi, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Allan Jude.
And we're recording this episode on the 9th of May 2018. Oh, it's time for your weekly dose of the BSD battery recharge, starting with the ZFS User Conference Allan went to recently, a couple of weeks ago. So what happened there?
Yeah. So we had the Datto, one of the companies that uses ZFS on Linux, hosted the ZFS User Conference on April 19th and 20th at their office in Norwalk, Connecticut. So attendees all met up for breakfast on the fourth floor of the office building there, which is like a lunchroom type area. It was just outside the theater where we were going to have the conference, where they have all the fancy projectors and lights and everything. It was interesting. The one whole wall of this kind of lunch space is all made out of the Lego plates. And then there are color-coded buckets built into the wall with that type of Lego, or that color Lego in them. And then people just draw things on the wall. There was some pixel art of like someone was working on a Mona Lisa type thing.
Okay.
People spelling out the names of some of the places they're from or the offices they have and other interesting things just built out of Lego on the wall. That was cool. And we had a nice breakfast there. And then it was time for the conference to start. And it was led off by Matt Ahrens, the co-creator of ZFS. And he discussed, his talk basically covered first the second most requested feature in ZFS ever, which is the ability to remove a disk. So he talked about device removal and how it works and how it came to be, and what the limitations are. And that feature is actually in FreeBSD now. It's in FreeBSD 12. I have to double check. I think it was merged, so it will most likely be part of FreeBSD 11.2 when that comes out in about a month and a half. So you'll be able to get your hands on that, which allows you to, it's called device evacuation, because it basically copies all the data off the device you want to remove and allocates it to other devices. Basically with this indirection table saying, this big range of blocks from that device is now over here, and the next range is over here. And so when you go and try to read, you find out, oh, it's on a disk that's not here anymore. And then you go to the remap table, find out where it actually is, and go read it from there. But there's a second feature that changes that a bit. And it's basically means that when you modify data that used to be on the device has been removed, it doesn't keep using the redirection table. So as you touch the data, it eventually stops going through that table and gets written with its actual location on the disks that are staying. So it means the table that you use for this remapping keeps shrinking as you modify the data and so on, meaning it takes less and less memory. And over time, none of the data will still be pointing to a device that's not there anymore.
And when do you know that the device can be actually removed? Is there some kind of status output?
So like when you do the the device removal command, it will do all the reallocation and you'll be able to remove the device. That will take only as much time as it really takes to copy that data off that disk. And then you can remove the disk. But you'll see in your zpool status, there will be a line saying the remapping stuff is taking this much of your memory. And then over time, that'll keep going down until it goes away.
Okay. I will try it out with my test pool, just in case. But it's good to know that this feature has been finally found its way into the code and people can use it.
So it only works for like stripes, non-redundant VDEVs, and mirrors. and it's
Not RAID Z.
Yeah, you cannot remove an individual device from RAID Z. It's much more complicated and doesn't work as easily as in this case.
Yeah.
So anyway, all the details are there. There'll be slides and video soon. And then Matt pivoted to talk about the most requested feature in ZFS ever, RAID Z expansion. Being able to take your, RAID Z 2 of 6 disks and add a 7th disk to it, instead of having to add 6 more whole disks or whatever. So he talked a bit about that, showed his diagrams on how it will actually work, and then announced that he has the first working prototype done, and it's done on FreeBSD.
Oh, nice. Exciting news.
That work is co-sponsored by Delphix, the company he works for, the FreeBSD Foundation, and IX Systems.
Yeah, I heard in our last status call that there is code available for review.
It's up on the code review site. It's not the final version, though. So if you do decide to test it, remember that your pool will be incompatible with the final version. And you'll have to, receive your data and destroy the pool or something. It's definitely an alpha quality thing. Currently, it does it all in one big transaction group. So the whole system basically stops to do it for however many hours it takes to copy the data. In test setups in VMs with small disks, that doesn't take so long and it's not so bad, but it'd be impractical to do on a large system. But this was just to get the initial part working and sort out the bugs that we found so far. Then it will move towards doing, bite-sized chunks so that your system is still usable while it's happening.
Yep. Okay, so there will be code coming in sooner rather than later, but let's give them some time to review.
There will be a more detailed update at BSDCan.
Oh, when that's close. If I look at the calendar, it's just a couple of weeks away.
A month.
Okay, exciting times.
Then next up was our friend Calvin Hendricks Parker, who he presented how he solved all of his backup headaches using ZFS, moving away from things like Amanda and Bacula and the complexity there to using ZFS, and showed off some of the bits that he's done for that. And I kept a couple of notes and talked to him after and showed him a couple of nice things he could do to save himself some work, and also just ways to make it slightly better or slightly faster.
Yeah, so remember, folks, this was a user conference, not a strictly developer conference. So users had the chance to talk about their ZFS setups and what they're using it for.
Yeah, and even, Matt's presentation was not so much the nitty-gritty of how device removal works, but more, here's the feature that's coming, and here are the restrictions and the use cases you would use it for, and what you can't use it for, and so on.
Cool.
Yep. And then Steven Umbacher from OS Nexus talked about their product and how they manage basically a very large number of ZFS nodes and making them work together. And that's their product. And then Micron, which is a company that manufactures a lot of the flash you see in SSDs and other devices, but also the NAND you see on RAM and so on. They're one of only a very small number of companies that produce basically RAM and NAND and NVDIMMs and 3D XPoint and all that. So they talked a bit about the future of Flash, where things are going, and they also talked about their new line of SSDs that are coming out, including a 4 terabyte SSD that uses 8 kilobyte sectors and a 7.5 terabyte SATA SSD that uses 16 kilobyte sectors.
Oh, wow.
And
cool.
So that led to, it resulted in a discussion of those devices after the talk was over, and how that may lead to enhancements to ZFS to better support those large sector sizes and large flash devices in general.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago when the SMR discussion happened at one of the EuroBSD cons, how ZFS could be modified to support that properly. So, but yeah, it's good to know that ZFS is also looking at the future storage technologies and not just ignore those.
Kind of it actually relates more to one of the other talks, but it fits to talk about it here. There's also the talk of the way Metis Labs are generated and what happens when you actually do things like make a RAID Z2 out of 10 or 12 terabyte disks, or even larger disks that are starting to come out now. You end up with Metis Labs that are really, really big, and how we might need to actually... so by default, when you create a new pool, each VDEV is split up or when you add a VDEV, each VDEV is split up into 200 segments. Mm-hmm. That made sense in the past when, you had drives that varied from hundreds of gigabytes to, n terabytes. But now that we're into double-digit terabytes, that means each of those 200 groups is 256 megabytes or 256 gigabytes or more. And they start to take up significant amounts of memory. And we have, 6 of those loaded at once or whatever. It comes down to, at some point, we might actually need to set a hard cap on the size of the Metis Lab and end up having more Metis Labs.
Yeah. It's just moving the goalposts more and more, either from memory or from storage or from networking. Okay.
Yeah. Because it's interesting, we were talking about the other one is people often use ZFS in the cloud. And so in the cloud, you often start with a relatively small amount of storage and then expand it when you need it. Whereas most ZFS arrays, you start with so many disks, and if you add more disks, you're usually adding more VDEVs rather than changing the size of the existing disks. Or even if you are, you're probably not going to swap all of the disks many times per year. Whereas if you're using the cloud somewhere, you might actually expand the underlying block devices that back your pool many times in a year. And so suddenly, if you divided the pool, or if they divided the device into 200 segments for Metis Labs, and then you expanded it, and then you expanded it again and again and again, suddenly now you have 1,000 Metis Labs instead of 200, and it can get very interesting. And so there might be certain tuning you could do to kind of hint that while I'm creating the pool at it's only 100 gigs, I do plan to expand this pool to be a couple times larger than that in the future, and maybe start with a number of Metis Labs that's lower, predicting that you're going to keep doubling the number of Metis Labs a bunch of times.
Okay, that's future work.
Yep. And then Alec Pinchuk from Datto talked about pool layout considerations. Again, because this is a user conference, it was geared towards things that users need to know. So we talked a bit more about what the different pool layouts are and what if you have 36 disks and you're going to RAID them up, there are quite a few different ways you could do that. And what, ones that make sense and ones that don't, and what the pros and cons of each of those are.
I remember a certain book someone wrote about ZFS where there are some configurations been discussed.
Yeah, there was a big table. I spent a lot of time making that table. And then Tony Hunter from Lawrence Livermore National Labs talked about the actual release process for ZFS on Linux, what actually goes into making a release of ZFS for Linux. And that was interesting for me just because of how different it is from how, FreeBSD and Illumos do it. Yeah.
I had also a couple of interesting discussions with the ZFS on a ZFS training I just did this week with the Linux people who were there who wanted to use, of course, ZFS on Linux. And we found out during the course of the training that some of the features aren't yet on the same level as FreeBSDs. So,
right, like I know ZFS Allow, I think, is not even a thing on ZFS on Linux.
Yeah, and also someone had used Debian, which is also a bit more behind than the other Linux distributions. So
yeah, especially like if you're using the Ubuntu that bundled ZFS, I think it's ZFS for Linux 0.6.5, whereas current is like 0.7.8, and there's a lot of difference in there.
Yeah, we had some things different than what FreeBSD does when we did ZFS Sends. So on Debian, it never stopped the send, and it was just 2.3 megabytes in size. But we send it again, and then it grew to 4.6 times the original. So it was unclear why the data set on the receiving side would now be double the size than on the sending side. But that's a different discussion.
Compression settings, a couple other things.
Could be, yeah.
When it's that small, the slop, it can even just depend on what their VDEV layout is.
Yeah. Okay, but there are different release processes in the downstream.
And then finally, Tom Caputi, who's the developer at Datto who's working on the encryption stuff, he presented Helping Developers Help You, which was some guidance for users on submitting bug reports. It included looking at their GitHub PRs and some of the examples of a good bug report versus a bad one, and how that affects how quickly the bugs get fixed.
What's the deal with ZFS encryption? When's it landing?
It's not really safe in Linux yet, so it's not. There are early ports of it to BSD, but
needs work.
You don't want to use it yet.
Okay. Yeah.
Then we had a cocktail party followed by dinner, and that was very nice, just getting to talk with people about ZFS and other stuff.
Okay. That's good to mingle a bit with the attendees also, not just listen to the talks all the time.
Exactly. And we stayed relatively late into the night, and then I went back to my hotel room and went to bed. Then the next day, we started off after another nice breakfast. We had a talk by Jervin Rial from Percona, who presented ZFS and MySQL on Linux, the sweet spots. So he was doing performance testing on AWS instances of XFS or EXT, one of the default Linux file systems versus ZFS. And, as Matt pointed out, ZFS is doing a lot more work than the other file systems. So you can't expect it to be faster. But he did find a couple of weird things, including when he used a slog, it wasn't making as big a difference as he thought it should, and so on. Anyway, it led to quite a bit of back and forth discussion, and it'll be interesting to see if in the end this results in some enhancements to certain things in ZFS, or if it ends up just resulting in some better advice on how to tune ZFS for modern versions of MySQL. Things have changed quite a bit since Oracle's original guidance, and OpenZFS is a lot different than Oracle ZFS nowadays.
Yep.
But it can... The part that complicates it is it really depends on your SQL workload, what certain settings make sense or not.
Is it more reading or writing?
So at some point I'm looking at actually maybe, I don't know when I'd have time, but it'd be nice to actually do something similar with FreeBSD on EC2. Again, identical machines comparing, say, UFS and ZFS, and doing some tweaking to see if by default there are certain bottlenecks that we can adjust around, and to also see when you're using compression, does the block size advice actually end up working against you? Does using a larger block size and getting higher compression ratio end up giving you lower latency than having to worry about the write amplification and so on? But again, it can very much depend on your workload on how much you're modifying existing records versus inserting new records.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on your workload, it can make a very big difference on what setting is to make the most sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the attendees wanted to try out ZFS on or in combination with Ceph, so that because he had Ceph already running and wanted to just add ZFS to that mix. I'll try to keep in touch and see how that goes, because it's a good combination on something that's, I don't think, so popular, but it's definitely doable. And then someone presented something about that standard thing.
Yep. Then I gave my talk about Z Standard. It was interesting because I know that the MySQL talk before, and I think one of the other ones before it also mentioned Z Standard and interest in that work. And then actually the talk after mine also was like, yes, I want that stuff. Is it ready yet?
The crowd went wild after you finished, or how was the reaction?
Not exactly, but there definitely was interest in it. And it's mostly done now. I need to do a minor little fix-up for channel program stuff that happened after it landed in FreeBSD after I had already written most of the Z Standard stuff, and so it just needs a little bit of touching up there. But currently there are no known bugs.
Okay, we'll give it a try and see.
In a little while, hopefully, that can land in head in time for BSD can.
Oh, no pressure, but that would be amazing. I just want to see it in action on some of the data I have. Yeah, cool. Definitely good work. I look forward to that. And I'm probably not the only one.
And then finally, there was a talk by Eric Spruill from Circonus, which is like a graphing stats company. And he gave his talk, which was called Thank You ZFS, basically saying, thank you to ZFS and the whole community because their product wouldn't really be possible with something other than ZFS. And then broke into a bit more of a user story. He gave a talk last year at the user conference about the problems they were having with fragmentation because they were writing very, very small amounts of data to a lot of files constantly. So in ZFS, those all get batched up in a nice one big write, and it'll be fine. Except they would collapse some of the data, but not all of the data. Right? So imagine they write to like a daily file, a weekly file, and a monthly file. Well, they average out the daily stuff and free that space. But they don't free the, 5 blocks that got written to the monthly and the 1 block that got written to the or the weekly and the monthly or whatever. So they'd end up with all these little holes of free space, but no nice big fat chunk of free space. And then when ZFS is trying to then write a big chunk of data at the end of a transaction group, it's like, oh, there is no giant contiguous amount of free space. I need to break this up into little pieces, which actually takes up more space and makes things worse and slower. And so we provided an update on that with some changes they made to their application and how that's helped them a lot. And in the further discussion, we also saw some interesting bits about how the collapsing of data in the Metis Labs works. So when a Metis Lab is too fragmented, we don't load it and consider using it for allocating space out of. That's an improvement from a couple of years ago. If you remember the free space histogram feature. I think it's a feature flag. Anyway, the idea with that was this way we could easily tell, all right, we have these 200 Metis Labs. That one's 90% fragmented. How would I don't go look for a bunch of free space in there when this one over here is 2% fragmented, which is a good improvement. But only when you actually load the Metis Lab does it consider collapsing a bunch of... So if you had a big block and you allocated it and then you freed it by punching holes in it and you keep punching holes in it, eventually almost all of it is probably free, but you haven't realized that it's not actually a bunch of 4K free blocks. It's big contiguous chunk of free space and you have to coalesce it. That only happens in ZFS when you load the Metis Lab. But if it's 95% fragmented, you never load it because you never want to consider using it until
it's not a candidate.
Almost completely out of space or whatever. And so it was never getting coalesced. And it's like, it's actually, there's a bunch of contiguous free space there. We just didn't realize it. And might result in some more patches to ZFS as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's interesting. Once you expose it to more people and use cases, the more, problems, if you want to call it that, you can find that you wouldn't find on your own because you have different use cases sometimes. So yeah, these user conferences definitely help the developers also to see what interesting uses their file system has or whatever it is.
Yeah, like I think if the Circonus people hadn't come, I would have never heard of their issue and never spent time thinking about it.
Yeah. And also seeing what companies are using ZFS. It's sometimes if you're an open source project, then you're like, who are my users? Who's using my system and is happy with it? Or if there's an issue, tell us about it. And conferences give that. And also people can talk amongst themselves who would normally not talk about because they don't know what other people are using. So it's always good to bring your people together who love a certain system or I don't know, code base, let's say. And yeah, so that's what a conference is for, among other things. And then there was pretty much, so will there be talk recordings and slides later?
Yes, it was all recorded and hopefully the video will be up relatively soon.
Mm-hmm. All right. Then we can rewatch that and some of the talks, information that's been given. All right. We also have other news this week. We have a report or an initial OmniOS impression by a BSD user. So this one is over at linuxquestions.org, which sounds interesting, but it's just the space for the...
It's just a forum, basically.
Yeah. So this one goes... I had been using FreeBSD as my main web server operating system since 2012, and I liked it so much that I even contributed money and code to it. However, since the FreeBSD guys and gals decided to install anti-tech feminism, I have been considering to move away from it for quite some time now. As my growing needs require stronger hardware, it was finally time to rent a new server. I do not intend to run FreeBSD on it, although the most obvious choice would be OpenBSD. I run it on another server and it works just fine. I plan to have a couple of databases running on the new machine, and database throughput has never been one of the OpenBSD's strong points. This is my chance to give Ilomos another try. As neither Wi-Fi nor desktop environments are relevant on a no X11 server, the server-focused OmniOS seemed to fit my needs. So the current or to be phased out setup on FreeBSD looks like this. So there's Apache 2.4 with SSL support, running 5 websites currently on 6 domains, both with HTTP and HTTPS. There is a somewhat large, tiny RSS installation from Git, updated via cron job, and SBCL running a daily cron job on the Web2 RSS parser, as well as an FTP server for sharing stuff with friends, an IRC bouncer, and MariaDB, as well as Postgres for some of the hosted services. So this is a typical web server and web application setup. So it continues with, I would not consider anything of that too esoteric for a modern operating system, since I was not really using anything mod rewrite related or anything like that. I was certainly ready to replace Apache 2.4 by Nginx, remembering that the prepackaged Apache 2.4 on FreeBSD did not support HTTPS out of the box and had ended up installing it from ports. That is the only change in my setup, which I'm actively planning. And so here's what I noticed. First impressions, hooray, a BSD bootloader, finally an operating system without grub. I made my experiences with that and don't want to repeat them too often. So that's positive here. It is weird that the installer won't accept mydomain.org as a host name, but SendMail complains that mydomain is not a valid host name right from the start. So OmniOS sent me into maintenance mode to fix that. A good start, right? So the first completely new thing is that I had to find out on my new shiny toy how to change the host name. There's no rc.conf and hostname mydomain.org was only valid for one login session. I found out that the host name was to be changed in 3 different files under etc on Solaris. The third one did not even exist for me. Changing other 2 files seems to have solved the problem for me. Okay, so that's a bit different from your operating system where you came from. So that needs to be relearned or adjusted. Random findings. I was wondering how many resources my mostly idle web server was using. I always thought Solaris was rather fat, but it still felt fast to me. All right, we're in Unix land and we need to think outside of the box. This table was really helpful. Although a number of things are different between OmniOS and SmartOS, I found out that the whatever stat tools, so there are different ones that end with stat, that do what top does. I could probably just install top from one of the package managers, but I failed to find a reason to do so. I had 99% idle CPU and RAM. That's all I wanted to know. And trying to set up twtxt informed me that Python 3.6 from package.in expects language and LC all to be set. Weird. Did FreeBSD do that for me? It's been a while. At least that was easy to fix. So there's also SMF, so Solaris's version of init, was confusing a little bit apparently. It has levels similar to Gentoo's OpenRC, but it mostly shuts up during the boot process. Stuff from package stores like Nginx comes up with a description how to set up the particular service, but I should probably read more about it. What if one day I install a package which is not made ready for OmniOS? I have to find out how to write SMF scripts, but that should not be my highest priority. The OmniOS documentation talks about a lot of zones, of course. If I understand that correctly, mostly equals FreeBSD jails. And yeah, that's pretty much it, with a little bit more on top of that. This could be my chance to try to respect a better separation between my various services if my laziness won't take over again. Yes, that's, yeah. Okay, and OmniOS's default shell, rather un-Unixy, seems to be the bash. And there's an update here. I was informed about a mistake here. The default shell is KSH93. There are bogus .bashrc files lying around though. Okay. So somewhere in between, my SSHD had a hiccup, or at least logging into it took longer than usual. If that happens again, I should investigate. And the conclusion of all of that so far from the first steps is that by the time of me writing this, I have a basic web server with an awesome performance and a lot of applications ready to be configured only one click away. The more I play with it, the more I have the feeling that I have missed a lot while watching my time with FreeBSD, or wasting my time. Well, if you call that wasting. For a system that is said to be dying, OmniOS feels well thought and, when equipped with a reasonable package management, comes with everything I need to reproduce my FreeBSD setup without losing functionality. And it closes with, I'm looking forward to what will happen with it. So yeah, sometimes it's interesting to, if you're looking at other systems, how you miss certain things that you're using on your current system. And then it's like, why it's not available on that other system, and it's just made my day a little bit more difficult because it's not part of my muscle memory yet. So yeah, it's good to see a migration story, and if there's an update available, then we'll cover that in the future episode as well.
Yep. This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head over to DigitalOcean.com and check them out. But if you really want in on the goodness, go over to do.co/BSDNow, and you'll be able to sign up for a $100 credit for 60 days. So you'll be given $100 of play money to try out DigitalOcean and get hooked like the rest of us already are.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's just a good amount of services around that. It gives you monitoring right out of the box. You can define custom networking and firewalls between your droplets. You can run one-click applications like LampStack, or if you want to run a MongoDB cluster, then they give you the possibility to start some pre-installed software with your operating system of choice. And it also allows you to share your operating systems or your little droplets with your friends. So you can say, oh, this is now our TeamSpeak server, but I'm the only one who's seeing the actual bills for it. So that's the team functionality there. And they also announced Kubernetes support in the coming soon section on their website. There's an early access request button if you're on Kubernetes and want to try it out. This will be available throughout September, apparently. So you can look out for that. And while you're waiting, you should check out the other features that DigitalOcean provides. So the spaces, for example, if you're looking for an object store, or the backup functionality. It's just, we can just talk about features.
The block storage. Remember how we were just talking about how you could create a ZFS pool that's only, say, 200 gigabytes, so you're only paying $20 a month, but then later you might need it to be a terabyte, and then later you might need it to be 7.5 terabytes. and then later you might need it to be 13 terabytes, or maybe you need it to be 16 terabytes.
Yeah.
You can do that with the block storage.
Definitely. So yeah, you'll be well prepared for future.
With the new device removal feature, if you used multiple block storages, each of, so many gigabytes or whatever, and then eventually didn't need the space anymore, you could remove one of the block storages, remap all the data onto one of the existing ones that you're keeping, and get rid of one of them, therefore lowering your monthly bill once you don't need the data anymore.
Yeah. So, but with the comprehensive monitoring, you can also see how much traffic your little machine, or maybe not so little machine, is receiving, how CPU and RAM are going, without having to log into the machine and running top or any other monitoring tool. Yeah, so check out DigitalOcean and use the coupon code Allan mentioned and give it a whirl. So next up, we have the Open Source Hardware Camp 2018 with a couple of BSD talks, apparently. Mm-hmm. So this is over at, is it oshug.org?
Yep, Open Source Hardware User Group.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this one goes, hi all, I'm pleased to announce that we have 10 talks and 7 workshops confirmed. So this is the conference in Lincoln, UK. And that's the Open Source Hardware Camp 2018 with the possibility of 1 or 2 more. And the registration is now open. So tell me again when that conference is. Here it is. June 30th and 1st of July. Okay, so for the first time ever, we will be hosting OSH Camp in Lincoln, and a huge thank for Sarah Markall for helping to make this happen. As in previous years, there will be a social event on a Saturday evening, and we have a room booked at the Wig and Mitter. Food will be available. Okay, so people won't starve. There will be likely a few of us meeting for pre-conference drinks on the Friday evening also, and details on the program can be found below. As well as ever, we have an excellent mix of topics being covered. So let's look for the BSD events here, or the BSD talks. Let me do a quick search here. There's a talk called An Introductory Workshop to NetBSD on Embedded Platforms. So that's covering cross-compilation support with build.sh, file tamper detection and execution prevention with VariExec, as well as high-level access to subsystems, exploring the GPIO bus, for example, via Lua, and rapid development with rump kernel. Oh, that sounds interesting as a workshop.
And that's presented by our friend Seven Jangian.
Okay, the usual suspects. Okay, yeah, that's excellent that there will be more talks about NetBSD. Very nice. So yeah, if you can make that date, then why not go to the Open Source Hardware Camp 2018? So, time for the news roundup this week. We have how-to here, Nextcloud 13 on FreeBSD. So that sounds interesting.
So this is over on the blog of Vermidin, who's done quite a bit of stuff over the years. Oh, yeah. They might actually have been somehow involved in the BEADM script for a while as well. Anyway.
Yeah, I think he did the original one, right. But yeah, this one is a good how-to about Nextcloud on FreeBSD.
Yeah. So they write, today I would like to share a setup of Nextcloud 13 running on a FreeBSD system. To make things more interesting, I'd be running inside a FreeBSD jail. I will not describe the actual Nextcloud setup itself, as there's lots of blog posts on that already. So the official Nextcloud 13 documentation says the recommended way to set it up is using MySQL or MariaDB, PHP 7 or newer, and Apache 2.4 with mod PHP. However, they prefer Postgres over MariaDB, and so they're going to do it that way, and they're going to run Nginx instead of Apache. So they set up Postgres 10.3, PHP 7.2.4, Nginx 1.12.2, and Memcache 1.5.7. They say the Memcache subsystem is least important. It can easily be changed into something more like a Redis or whatever. They prefer not to use any third-party tools for FreeBSD jails, so they did vanilla jails. This is not because they're bad or anything like that. It's just there are many choices, and it's what is provided in generic is good enough. And they wanted the tutorial to be about Nextcloud, not about a jail management tool. So on the host, they started up by setting up their some sysctl variables, allowing the jail to do raw sockets, so it'll be able to do ping and so on, and to allow the chflags command inside the jail.
Yep.
So they set that up. And then they used rctl. They actually enabled that, which allows you to limit what the jail can use as far as resources. And so then they looked at this. So they say the complete jail after finishing installation takes up less than 800 megabytes. If you move some not needed parts from the install, you can get it even smaller. And then the ports tree took about 1.6 gigabytes of space.
It's a bit bigger.
Sorry, the ports tree took 700 and something megabytes, but in total, it made the jail 1.6 gigabytes. So he used his laptop for the host in this example, and that's why the jail is configured to use the wireless interface and internal address. To distinguish the commands I typed on the host from the ones on the system, they varied the prompts that you'll see. So to say, host or root at Nextcloud, which is the jail. And then they basically walk through starting things up and looking at things. Creating data sets for the jail, setting the special record size for the Postgres database to avoid the write amplification, downloading the FreeBSD base system and extracting it into the jail, making a jail.conf, enabling jails on startup, hacking up their host file so they can have a short name for the jail. And that's about it. And then in the rc.conf, they set up Postgres and PHP and Memcache and Nginx, disabled sendmail, set a couple other variables, and they were off to the races.
Yeah, it's all super detailed, and you can compare the output from each command to yours in case there's some error. So that's definitely a good walkthrough to get the Nextcloud running.
Choosing whether you want the rolling release or the quarterly packages for FreeBSD, updating packages, using the ports tree if you want to custom compile stuff, and all that fun stuff. Yes, it's very detailed and covers everything. So if you want to try out Nextcloud, this is definitely going to cover all of the steps.
Yeah, give it a try, and also check out the other tutorials. Me personally, I'm checking out the most recent one about MongoDB and comparing it with my setup on the big data cluster. I wish I had done it on FreeBSD, but I was in a bit of a rush, so I was more interested in getting it running in the first place. But now that I know that it's running on FreeBSD, I might as well switch next time. So yeah, check out the blog and try it out for yourself.
Yep.
Our next item is OpenBSD on my fanless desktop computer, which is something that's been requested a couple of times. It starts with, you asked me about my setup. Here you go. I've been using OpenBSD on servers for years as a web developer, but never had a chance to dive into system administration before. If you appreciate the simplicity of OpenBSD and you have it, give it a try on your desktop. Bear in mind, this is a relatively cheap ergonomic setup because all I need is Xterm with Vim and Firefox. I don't care about CPU, GPU performance or mobility too much, but I want a large screen and a good keyboard. And it lists the items and price.
They bought a Zotac Nano B, kind of mini PC, 16 gigs of RAM for it, a 250 gig SSD, Samsung 850 EVO. They bought a 23.8-inch IPS Full HD screen. They spent quite a bit of money on their fancy keyboard and so on. And then they bought a trackball mouse and had about an $1,100 US computer.
Yeah, and you can see a picture of the setup, and they mentioned that this how-to was also written on that. So for OpenBSD itself, I tried a few times to install OpenBSD on my MacBooks. I heard some models are compatible with it, but in my case, it was a bit of a fiasco, thanks to NVIDIA and Broadcom. Well, that's why I bought a new computer, so just to be able to run this wonderful operating system. Now I run stable on my desktop and servers. Servers are supposed to be reliable. That's obvious. Why not run current on a desktop? Because stable is shipped every 6 months, and I know that it's often enough for me. I prefer slow fashion. And of course, there's more information. If you check out the full blog, then you can see more details and pictures how that has been set up. And it's, again, a fanless computer, so you won't hear any noises coming from your winning from the inside the case or something.
Yep, that's
very nice.
That's an i3 7100U, so that's dual core 2.4 gigahertz.
Well, you can do some pretty good work on that. So that's not too slow.
Yep. And you can see here's a picture of it. It's nice and small, sporting a nice Run BSD sticker.
Very cool.
Yep. So this week's episode is also brought to you by IX Systems. Head over to ixsystems.com/BSD Now and get in touch with them about your BSD server needs, or open source server needs even, if you happen to be one of those people.
Yeah, because they have built a lot of systems for customers who had exactly wishes about their setup and sometimes weren't sure about certain components or whether a certain hardware will be supported by...
Yeah, so it turns out hardware is important. And having someone that knows what they're doing with the hardware is important. So you describe to them what you want to use the server for, and they will help you pick the best hardware for the job, because they basically live and breathe hardware every day. It's what they do. I don't. So I want to be able to have someone I can go to and trust that they will build the right thing for me and not, I don't end up with any headaches. And they do that. And because they do that, they also back it all, right? Like, so after they help me design the right system and so on, they also support it after that. So, if there is a problem, a disk fails after a couple of months or whatever, then a quick support ticket, and I give them the address of the data center, and they ship the new drive and the return shipping label to ship the dead one back to them, and so on, and it's all just taken care of. Unlike some other companies, the white glove support starts before you buy anything and goes all the way through.
Yeah, this is some of the differentiators that IX Systems is doing for the customers, and making sure that the hardware that they ship has been tested and is not arriving and just works for one day or something. So that's certainly something they do for their customers. And it's not only just big servers, it's also could be a FreeNAS Mini or the Mini XL for your home or your office needs, to back up your files, of course, on ZFS-backed storage, so you can use all the goodies that we mentioned in the show. And you can use FreeNAS, the more web-centered ZFS configuration tool, if you don't want to spend too much time on the command line, or that scares you, or I don't know why. But FreeNAS is definitely a good tool if you want to run your own little NAS at home or in the enterprise.
And the other thing IX does is represent BSD at conferences and trade shows all over the world. So our friend Michael Dexter just wrote a blog post on IX's site about his trip to NAB.
That's the National Broadcasting and something.
Yes, it's video and broadcasting. And, it turns out that results in a lot of video that needs to be stored. Sometimes in, uncompressed formats that take up a lot of space.
And what file system are you using for that?
Yeah. And so, as Dexter says, he quite literally grew up in a Hollywood production studio. So it was great to see all the stuff that he was used to seeing and so on. But interesting to talk to people about, how modern movies rely on technology directly derived from things like aeronautics and supercomputing and so on. But yeah, you may not have known, but Bullet Time, the first, the kind of fancy animation from the first Matrix film, was actually rendered on FreeBSD. And it's no surprise that OpenZFS is very popular in Hollywood for storing video, whether that's, the new Star Wars movies or something else. I bet this Toy Story people wish that they had been using ZFS for that.
Yeah, way back when.
Yep. So lots of notes there about their trip to Vegas for that. And they show here they have a FreeNAS set up to display the single pane of glass interface. You can see everything that's going on the FreeNAS.
Yeah, that's certainly nice. And also, IX Systems is not just going to many of these conferences, they're also sponsoring many of these conferences, like the upcoming BSD Can. So that's also their way of contributing back.
So, not only are they a great hardware provider, but they're also keeping important open source projects like FreeNAS and TrueOS alive, but they also give back to the community.
Yep. So check them out, give them a call if you're in the need for a new server, and let them build you a good solution. All right. We have another item in our news roundup in that regard, that we have an introduction to HardenedBSD world. So that's over also at vermaiden.wordpress.com. So twice on this show, that's okay. It starts with HardenedBSD is a security enhanced fork of FreeBSD, which happened in 2014. HardenedBSD is implementing many exploit mitigation and security technologies on top of FreeBSD, which all started with implementation of address space layout randomization, aka ASLR, and the fork has been created for ease of development. So to cite the HardenedBSD webpage, here's the quote. HardenedBSD aims to implement innovative exploit mitigation and security solutions for the FreeBSD community. HardenedBSD takes a holistic approach to security by hardening the system and implementing exploit mitigation technologies. Most FreeBSD enthusiasts know MFS-BSD project by Martin Matuszka, and the FreeBSD system loaded completely into memory. Yeah, that's helping you with saving your pool sometimes, or just getting the system repaired in case there's something wrong.
It's a nice remote rescue system, things like that.
Yeah, and so the MFS-BSD synonym for the HardenedBSD world is SoloBSD over at solobsd.org, which is based on HardenedBSD sources. So there's already downstream distros using that. One may ask how HardenedBSD project compared to more well-known for its security OpenBSD system, and it is a very important question. The OpenBSD developers try to write good code without dirty hacks for performance or other reasons. Clean and secure code is most important for OpenBSD, and the OpenBSD project even made security audit of all OpenBSD code available line by line. This was easier to achieve in FreeBSD or HardenedBSD because OpenBSD codebase is about 10 times smaller. This also has other implications and the possibilities opening with that. While FreeBSD and HardenedBSD offer many new features like mature SMP subsystem, even with some NUMA support, the ZFS file system, the Geom storage framework, Beehive virtualization, VirtualBox options, and many other modern features, the OpenBSD remains classic Unix with the UFS file system and very theoretical SMP support. The BMM project tries to implement new hypervisor in the OpenBSD world, but because of lack of support for graphics, it's for OpenBSD, Illumos, and Linux currently. And you will not virtualize Windows or Mac OS X there yet, but I'm convinced that there will be something happening soon. Just looking at what they presented at BeehiveCon at AsiaBSDCon in March. So back to the article. This is also only the virtualization option for OpenBSD, as there are no jails on OpenBSD. Wait, aren't there? Oh well. Current Beehive implementation allows one even to boot latest Windows 2019 technology preview. So a HardenedBSD project is FreeBSD system code base with lots of security mechanisms and mitigations that are not available on FreeBSD. For example, the entire lib32 tree has been disabled by default on HardenedBSD to make it more secure. Also, LibreSSL is the default SSL library on HardenedBSD, although if you watched the last episode of BSD Now, you saw the news item.
Undo that because it wasn't working.
Yeah. So, yeah, that is unfortunate, but state of the current play. So there's a little comparison between LibreSSL and OpenSSL vulnerabilities, but that's pretty much for you to read. One might see HardenedBSD as FreeBSD being successfully pulled up to the OpenBSD level. At least that is the goal. But as FreeBSD has tons more code and features, it will be harder and longer process to achieve that goal. And it closes with, as I do not have that much competence on the security field, I will just repost a comparison from the HardenedBSD project versus other BSD systems, and you can find that in our show notes, as well as on the HardenedBSD website. Okay, that's the article we have here. The next up article that we have is for the people who always wanted to run their own Git server, because here's a little how-to that we found. It's simply titled "Running My Own Git Server."
Yes, so this is interesting. You know, GitHub happens to have snow days every once in a while, and sometimes you still want to have your own stuff. So yes, this article is predominantly based on the work of Hilcho Postuma, who you should read, because I would have spent far more time doing this if it wasn't for their stuff. But anyway, going on, they say, since I started university 3 years ago, I started using lots of services from lots of different companies. The cloud trend led me to believe that I wanted other people to look after my data for me. Turns out I was wrong. Since finding myself loving the ethos of OpenBSD, I found myself wanting to apply this ethos to the services I use as well. Not only is it important for me because of the security benefits, but also because I like the minimalist style that OpenBSD has. This is the first in a mini-series documenting my move from bloated, hosted, sometimes proprietary services to minimal, well-known, free, self-hosted services. So in this case, they have the OpenBSD HTTPD, Acme client, which is the Let's Encrypt client for OpenBSD, Git, cgit, and slow CGI. So setting up their HTTP server is pretty easy. They just enable HTTPD and slow CGI and enable them. And then in their HTTP config, they just set up git.example.com, listen on an IP address, and set their script to be the cgit socket or command, and set up slow CGI to be able to run the CGI. So now the HTTPD is configured to run cgit. Once it's been configured, then they just have to go over to cgit, edit the cgit RC, set up their header and footer, and configure all the bits for that, including the path to their repo, set the permissions on the directories, get it going, and then they start it up. And now you can point yourself at the website and be able to see Git. So
cool.
now they have a repo that they can point their Git client at and check things in and out.
Nice. Yeah. If you want to share that with a couple of friends, or definitely share the code with a couple of friends, then yeah, this is a nice and not too difficult and long setup to get that running.
Yeah.
So after this little how-to, we have the Beastie Bits for this week. My PenguinCon 2018 schedule by none other than Michael W. Lucas, of course, regular PenguinCon attendee.
PenguinCon was the weekend that just ended.
Oh.
So we were maybe a little late getting you this one, but just to rub in all the things that you missed, Friday, it started with the LN2 ice cream. So that's liquid nitrogen ice cream. I kind of wish I got to do that. And then there was a panel that evening called The Internet Before the Web, which is interesting. Then Saturday, Michael kept himself quite busy by giving an hour-long talk about the BSD operating systems in 2018. Then, no, he actually scheduled for 2 hours being at the Liquid Nitrogen Purple Haze ice cream booth. Then at noon, he did another talk on large-scale SSH using keys and certificates. Then at 1 o'clock, he sat on the senior sysadmin panel. And then crossing genres a little bit, at 3 o'clock, he sat on the writing group panel. And then at 4 o'clock, he did a reading in the writer's block area. And then at 6 o'clock, he did another panel on writing productivity. And then at 7 o'clock was critiquing without alienating the author. Yeah, he could have used that course before working with me.
Well.
I'm teasing. Michael and I got along very nicely. And then 8 o'clock was making a living as a mid-list writer. And then on Sunday, more ice cream and the social media marketing.
Okay. That will be...
For the first time ever, none of my talks overlapped the liquid nitrogen ice cream sessions. This could not have been easy to achieve, and I sincerely appreciate the efforts to accommodate my personality defects.
Quirks. There are quirks.
It says defects. He tried to cross it out, but he didn't do it.
Okay, maybe the talks will appear on the usual video sites for you to relive some of those. Of course, not the ice cream sessions, but at least the talks could be available later on. So if that will happen, then we'll mention it. All right, that's one part of the news, but we also have SIG action, see who killed you, and more. This is by rachelbythebay.com, and it's an article about, signals in Unix and telling you who did what.
Yeah, so it starts off, what happens when your process receives a signal? Assuming you care about such things, you might have done a one-shot signal, sigfoo, and then some function in your code. And simple enough, when you get a sigfoo, then control will jump into that function. It's up to you to deal with the rest while avoiding things that should not be run in a signal handler. And there's a whole man page about that. Anyway, it gets digs into other stuff and talks about our favorite SIG of all, SIG info.
Yes.
So you should definitely read up on this if you're interested in implementing SIG info in your program.
Yeah, signals are still useful, and especially SIG info. I'm always happy to have them just to see what's going on if the terminal doesn't give me.
And their example here is actually for finding out who killed your program. So she says, let's say your program was shut down by something that sent it a signal. Was it your init program? Was it your package manager? Was it a human? How do we know? Easily, we print the source of the signal. Later, when groveling through the logs after your system goes down unexpectedly, you can see that UID 0, and you know who that is, knocked your program down from PID 9,000, whatever. It's like, oh, okay. Whereas if you see it was done by UID 1,000, you're like, and so on.
Okay, yeah. Check out that article and, learn the signals. Next up, we have
SIG
news
info everywhere.
Yeah, SIG info, all the things. Next up is news from the NetBSD folks over at NetBSD Announce. So there's a new core team member, Taylor Campbell, and the reason is that after nearly 13 years on the NetBSD core team, Yamamoto Takeshi has decided to step down. He has been a regular contributor to NetBSD, and we would all like to thank him for his work, helping guide the project to where it is now. It is safe to say that the NetBSD project would not be the same without his quiet and effective advice and wisdom. So, and Taylor Campbell will take his place on the core team, and he's already well known for his contributions and is also the current board representative for the core team, and they look forward to bringing his influence to bear on the way NetBSD's progress over the next few years. Okay, that's, yeah, definitely thanks for the efforts, and yeah, good luck to Taylor Campbell, who's replacing him.
And then over at Phoronix, they're pointing out some recent commits to DragonFlyBSD. They say Dragonfly 5.4 will deliver at least a few kernel-level performance improvements. It turns out just after hours of wrapping the latest BSD versus Linux benchmarks, Matthew Dillon pushed a few performance tweaks to the Git tree of Dragonfly. The latest DragonFlyBSD work catching our attention is removing the SMP bottleneck with the UID info, descriptors, and lockf. This change should remove numerous global bottlenecks for different I/O operations. Additionally, there's now a per-thread cache for file descriptors and pointers, or file pointers. There's also other Dragonfly activity in Git this weekend. The commits do not comment about performance, but there are a bunch of changes that may affect things anyway.
Well, it's good to see. I mean, SMP is difficult to implement, and yeah, fixes here and there are necessary if you find some kernel regressions or some slowdowns. All right, yeah, Dragonfly getting SMP improvements, that's a good thing to hear. And last but not least, in our BSD bits, we have writing FreeBSD malware. So this is a recording that Sean Webb or a recording from a talk by Sean Webb, and he presented that topic. And he will demonstrate a couple of things that you are probably not aware of or should take a closer look at if you are in the malware prevention business or in that camp. So definitely a good talk, and also the kernel parts behind that are interesting to get to know those. What you also should get to know is the backups that TarSnap provides, because there are online backups for the truly paranoid and sponsoring our feedback and questions section. So you have done a backup, hopefully, recently. Is it secure? Well, so what you want to do is you want to have the storage space, and the biggest storage space is available in the cloud, but you want to be sure that everything that reaches the cloud is encrypted, and that's what TarSnap does for you. It locally encrypts everything that you will want to back up before it puts it in the cloud. And as long as you're the only person holding the key, no one, especially not the TarSnap people themselves, cannot get to your data because they have no way of decrypting it.
Yeah. So you run TarSnap. The command line looks just like the tar command line, except for instead of writing a file to your disk, it writes a backup with that name to the cloud. But inside, it's a different story. Instead of doing what tar does, of just grabbing your files and sticking them together and maybe piping them through a compressor, it reads your files, then segments them based on Colin's custom algorithm that finds the natural breaks in the file where to create the blocks. Then it deduplicates that to see, hey, you've already uploaded a block that matches this to the cloud before, so we'll just reference that instead of having to upload another copy. So it breaks up into chunks and deduplicates it and keeps a local cache of all the hash of the blocks that you've uploaded. Then it compresses those chunks, and then it encrypts and signs those compressed blocks and then sends them to the cloud. In this way, the encryption ensures that no one in the cloud can actually see what your data is, and the signature allows you to ensure that when you get the data back, you know it hasn't been maliciously tampered with.
Exactly, because who knows who is messing with your files in the cloud. But since everything is cryptographically secure, you can be sure that no one first looked into the files and also didn't change them.
Yep, and it means all that happens on your computer with source code you can audit, and that's something that no other backup company offers.
Yeah, so one more reason to check out TarSnap. All right, feedback and questions time. We have a question from Trolls in Denmark writing, "Hey Allan and Benedict, so far I've mostly been using ZFS with FreeBSD, but in the near future I will need it on Linux for one of my machines. From what I gather, when using ZFS with Linux, it is recommended to set the XATTR, which is extended attributes, option to SA to store extended attributes in inodes. I noticed that FreeBSD does not support this option, so I'm wondering how this would affect my ability to use ZFS Send to transfer datasets to my backup server, which runs FreeBSD with ZFS. Would the extended attributes just be ignored, or how would the system react?"
That's a good question. I don't actually know the answer to that one off the top of my head.
Yeah, so
it should be easy enough to test. I imagine the data is stored in ZFS in such a way that it'll persist. You just wouldn't use that data when you're on FreeBSD, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, but since it's not supported on FreeBSD, they might as well just ignore everything that's extended attribute related.
Because if you're then going to send it back to Linux, you would want those attributes to still be there, not just have been thrown away.
Sure. But we need to look at the code to see what the actual extended attributes option does on FreeBSD, if it does anything at all.
Right. But the easiest way probably is to just make a data set, send it from Linux to FreeBSD, make sure that works, and then send it back and make sure your attributes are still there.
Yep. That's a good test case before you do the regular setup and the regular backups.
But yes, this is something I'll have to think about and look into. Not that I have time to do that right now.
Yeah, but yeah, we could take a look at that, because it's actually nice to get that compatibility between FreeBSD and ZFS. Not FreeBSD and ZFS, ZFS on FreeBSD versus ZFS on Linux, because the data exchange between the two, pretty much before ZFS revolved around, creating a FAT32 file system or something. So, or other Unix operating systems could read or set up an NFS server or something. But this could be the upcoming file exchange format, especially when we look at the maybe someday becoming a stable version of the ZFS on Windows port. Mm-hmm. And that would be the universal file exchange then, which we never had before between the Unix world and the Windows world.
Slightly unrelated news, but Notepad on Windows finally got support for Windows line endings in the next update of Windows 10.
Okay. Yeah, sorry we couldn't provide you with more information. Try it out for yourself, and then
I've just never had to try that, so I don't know.
Yep. I mentioned to the people this week where I gave my ZFS tutorial. With all these options in ZFS, you probably won't just use a handful of them. You can do so much with them, but most options you just leave alone and don't use them. Not because you couldn't, but yeah, it's just most people don't use all that big feature set that ZFS provides. Anyway, okay, up to the next question. Sharing your screen by Mike. That's short and sweet. It starts, "Allan, Benedict, just wanted to remind you that VLC will capture the screen and serve it by RTMP, which could be another method for sharing one's screen. Also, there's Guacamole." Yep. I know Guacamole.
I think these were a response to a question we got from a user a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's... yeah, we should connect that or get it.
But yeah, I think OBS does it as well. So.
Mm. Yeah, I need to look at Guacamole. They seem to have a couple of updates since the last time I looked at it. But my use case did change a little bit, so it's not in the current focus that I need to get it. But I should at least look at what's new in there. Cool. Thanks for the information, and yeah, we'll see what new sharing options will come up in the future. So, because there's always a need for new kind of desktop sharing or screen sharing. Next up is a message or a question we got about ad locking. Is it ad locking or ad blocking on FreeBSD? I guess ad blocking. Goes like the following. "Hi guys, great work with the show. Thank you. I've been a listener for over a year now." Oh, cool. I now run FreeBSD current on my Lenovo 500S and a fanless x86 router at home. I also have a FreeBSD Digital Ocean droplet, excellent, that runs an IRC bouncer, Samba server, Quagga router, OpenVPN, and a Squid proxy server. Oh, gee, I'm jealous now. I try to stick with FreeBSD, even though it is difficult to get some things to run on it that were designed on Linux. I recently lost my temper and used Perl in anger to rewrite the basic functionality of a Linux-only software called Pi-hole to run on FreeBSD. Well, that's good kind of anger management, I would say.
Sure.
It is a DNS blocker that uses DNS masquerading and a host file to block ads. It currently uses crontab to self-update every week and will keep up to date with the Pi-hole project. Hope this helps someone out there. Yeah, definitely give us a link to the code. I guess most people
I know
will.
A bunch of people that are using Pi-hole as their local DNS server. Basically, the idea is a local caching resolver that blocks a lot of ad subdomains. By having a list and just making it so it doesn't load, so that your browser doesn't load the ads.
Yeah, don't hide
and
the
it can
code.
work network wide, right? And so you just have your router give out that IP as the DNS server, and then everything in your network has ad blocker, even your cell phone and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. If you want, why not share that code and make a port out of it, maybe, so other people can just package install that and use that in their own networks. Cool. Thanks for that information. I guess you will get a couple of more users after this show has been out. And yeah, cool. So this is a nice way of giving something back to the community. And last but not least is Brad writing about recommendations for snapshot strategy. Oh, I see Allan already getting onto that. Okay, here it goes. Hello, Allan and Benedict and JT. I figured out I would ask the experts on a question that has been kind of nagging at me for a while. What is each of your strategies for doing ZFS snapshots? This is on a desktop and a laptop. Currently, I'm doing them once a day at 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. respectively. These snapshots are then...
One of those was AM, wasn't it?
Yeah, probably, because just 1 hour away, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, probably AM. So 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. These snapshots are then replicated to my FreeNAS. However, with ZXfer and zREPL being available, it is fairly simple to snapshot more often. What I'm trying to work on in my head is how often one should or does back up or snapshot a desktop machine. Because for a critical server, it makes sense to snap every 10 minutes, save one for an hourly, save one for the earliest on a daily, and so forth. But what makes sense for a desktop? I was thinking either hourly to daily to weekly, and so forth on possibly every 6 hours, or 4 times a day to daily to weekly, etc. Thoughts?
Yeah. Because ZFS snapshots are so low cost, there's not much reason not to create more snapshots. Especially if they're being managed automatically. There are many times where you've just run a command and then are like, I wish I had taken a snapshot first. Well, if you take one every 10 minutes, then maybe you probably already have a snapshot from at least only a couple of minutes ago. Or, oops, I accidentally just screwed up this file. Accidentally pasted the wrong thing and it erased a bunch of text and wasn't able to undo it in the editor or whatever. Having a snapshot is great. So yeah, on my laptop, I take quite a few snapshots. The nice thing with some of the tools for creating snapshots, like I think ZFS tools, is you can set a different policy for different data sets. So maybe your home directory, you want to take snapshots frequently because stuff changes there all the time. But the rest of the whole system, you only need a couple of times, twice a day or something is fine. And you have the options there of taking certain snapshots much more frequently and other ones less frequently. But for your system, you might want to keep the snapshots longer. Whereas your home directory, if I screwed up a file a week later, if I haven't noticed, it's probably fine or whatever. So you can do very different frequencies. On my servers, I take every 15 minutes, keep 6 or 12 hours of full every 15 minutes. And then I keep 2 or 4 a day for a couple of weeks, and then daily for like 8 weeks.
So I use the ZFS tool script by Brian Drury. I want to check out the ZF Snap or ZFS Snap 2, which is mostly written in shell only. I haven't just had the time to do that yet, but this ZFS tools has been used for at least 2 years now on my servers, and it's just fire and forget. I even wrote an Ansible script just to install that and do the necessary entries in cron tab. And I basically use the one that are described in Michael Lucas's blog post or in the ZFS book. And it's, as Allan said, just set it and forget it, but be happy when you need it. The snapshots are there. Snapshot early, snapshot often. If you don't have any changes or not many changes between the snapshots, it's just a couple of bytes. It's just nothing.
The performance difference between having 2 snapshots and 100 snapshots on your laptop is 0, except for when you're actually listing the snapshots. And even hundreds isn't going to hurt you. You know, at work, we have servers with 300 or 400 data sets, all with, 50 snapshots in total. And we're taking new snapshots of all of those data sets every 10 or 15 minutes. And they're being replicated offsite and then cleaned up.
Yeah, the rotation feature is nice, so that you don't have to worry about it. I also take snapshots out of that separate thing, because sometimes I want to have a snapshot that says semester start, because I want to roll back to that specific one to know that the software has been installed, but the students haven't messed with it yet.
And so this gets to my laptop setup as well. I have a laptop I use. When I'm at home, I have desktops. I don't really use my laptop, but it's my lifeline when I go to a conference. So the base system gets snapshots all the time and has boot environments, but there's also my work directory, which normally lives on my NAS at home. But before every conference, I will snapshot it, replicate it to my laptop, take my laptop with me, work on code at a conference and on the airplane and so on. And then when I'm done, I snapshot on my laptop, incremental, replicate it back to my NAS, and then switch back to working on my NAS, and the laptop goes back in the backpack and waits for the next conference. And I love doing that. And it also means, I can undo things when things go bad. Often, like, I have the ZFS Z Standard compression work, and I just started working on catching it up to the latest head, because of commits that happened in the meantime.
Don't lose that.
Before I do, I always take a snapshot before I do the SVN up, to make sure that if I screw up a merge conflict, I'll be able to undo it and try over again.
Okay.
If you use Git, you're definitely going to want snapshots so you can undo things.
Yeah. And also, for a desktop, you might want to check out Lumina, because it has a nice time slider in the file manager. And also think about each data set. Do you need to really snapshot your user ports directory? Probably if you're not developing
unless
ports?
You're a ports committer, and then you're like, I actually would like to be able to undo the changes I just did. When I ran this sed script to update, 400 ports, and now I need to undo that, but not lose the last 4 hours of work. Snapshots are the best.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, snapshot more and be safe than sorry.
Yep.
All right. That's it for this week. Again, send us your questions that you have, everything that you found about BSD on the web, or questions, comments that you have about the show, to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we'll cover it in a future episode. Thanks for watching.
And special reminder, if you watch live, we're having a special bonus episode on Friday, May 11th. At the regular time. So tune in and watch us live. Be part of the chat room that helps make up the show. And that's at 1800 UTC. And you can check it out at bsdnow.tv.